Hi, it's Michelle from Oliso, and I'd like to welcome you back to my sewing studio. Today I'm going to show you an alternative to binding the corners of your quilts. Instead of a mitered corner with a square edge, I'm going to show you how to make a rounded corner. This is a quilt that I made several years ago for my husband, and it has the traditional mitered corners on it. As you can see, did a lot of different blues in the binding, which I think is really fun. And don't forget to always label your quilts. But I always am a little frustrated in making sure that the miters come out perfectly. It's something that I have a little bit hard time with. But this quilt is very geometric and it really needed a square corner. So I just kind of, did my best, and I think it came out pretty good. But let me show you an alternative. This is a quilt that I made last year, and it is done with an improv method that I started in a class with Denise Schmidt. It has a lot of hand quilting on it and a lot of circular embroidered pieces. So I thought that a rounded corner would really lend to that. I really love to do some fun and funky edging on my quilts. And the back is always a good thing to have something fun on the back. And then I did this other quilt and I used the same method. So you have to use a bias binding for the corners, which takes up a little bit more fabric. So you can use a straight edge fabric for the sides and measure out and use bias around the corner if you want to save on your fabric. So let me move this aside and I'll show you the supplies you need. You will need fabric for your quilt binding. I always like to use something contrasting, either stripes or dots or something really colorful that's a little bit different from the quilt itself, just to bring that out, unless you want to use something more subtle because of the type of quilt you're making. I'll be using my wool pad ironing surface, my Oliso mini project iron. I'll also be using some Wonder clips from Clover, a pair of shears, and a small pair of scissors to clip the edges. I think it's easier to handle. Rotary cutter, a marker. I'm going to use a Sharpie just so you can see it a little bit better. A ruler. I'm using a 6-inch saucer, but you can also use any circle, but a 6-inch will probably work well. Some straight pins and a rotary mat. And I think if you have a 45-degree line on it for your angle, for your bias tape, that will be really helpful. I've placed my fabric on my rotary cutting mat. On this mat, it has a 45-degree angle line, which I think is really helpful to get started. And I'm going to line that up with my ruler and make my first cut. And there you are, it's on the diagonal. As you can see, it's stretchy. And that's what you'll need to go around the corner. As opposed to cutting it on the straight grain, as you can see, it really doesn't stretch as much. And that's going to give you a nice curve. So we'll turn our fabric around. And I like to do about a 2.5-inch strip for my binding. Let's see, I lost my rotary cutter. That's why it's always good to make sure you close it for safety reasons. So let's line that up. Now, quilt binding is only folded over once, as opposed to single fold or double fold bias tape. And the reason being, quilt binding really needs to have that double edge around the corner, because you'll be washing your quilt and drying it, and it will have wear and tear. So once you put it on over the quilt edge itself, you're going to have a double thickness of fabric there, and that's going to be really helpful. I press that out, and now you can see it has a nice little stretch to it. So let me get my sample piece and we'll start making the corners. I made a little sample quilt here so I can show you all the steps in one small space. This is the leftovers from the quilt that I had made for my husband, and as you can see, it has all the squared off geometric rectangular pieces, which I felt I needed a mitered cornered traditional binding. But this is quilted with circles, so I thought if I had done the quilt in circles, a curved edge would have fit fine. So let me get started on our first corner. So this is where you'll need your 6-inch saucer or a little disc of some sort. And I'm going to measure about 3.5 inches in. As you can see, with my permanent marker, I had made 2 marks about there. And that way, I will get, if I measure this way each time on each corner, I'll get the same curve. And I'm going to mark that. And you can just use a disappearing pencil or marking pen. I'm using this marker just so you can see it a little bit better. So, and I will do that on all 4 corners. And then I'll just clip that corner off with my shears. Now I'm ready to pin my binding on. Of course, you know you will need enough binding to fit all along the straight edge of your quilt, which you can do on the straight grain from your fabric and attach it to a bias to go around the corner, unless you want to do the whole thing in bias. Bias tape or binding takes a little bit more fabric, so if you want to save a little bit of fabric, you can do that. So we attach it to the front, and I'm going to be using some pins to do that rather quickly. You could also use your Wonder clips here if you'd like. And as you can see, it really goes, and all you're going to have to do, it goes nicely around the corner. You're just going to have to hold that down when it's in the sewing machine. Okay. And you'll take this over to the sewing machine and do your typical 1/4 inch, or I prefer 3/8 inch for my binding. So you're going to take and sew that around the corner, and you'll end up with this. So I'm going to remove my pins. And as you can see, I have a nice corner here, and this will flip around the edge. But to relieve some of this tension and bulk, I'll take my little scissors and just gently clip right up to the stitch line, but not through. It can always repair it if you need to. There we go. Okay. And that will go right around like that. Okay, so here we have a corner that's been clipped, and we're going to roll that over, and we'll give it a little press. And I'll be clipping my Wonder clips to hold that in place. And look at that beautiful curve. It just looks so great. Looks a little fancy, but so simple. And you want to check on this side to make sure it looks even and you're covering up your stitches right here. Okay. And once you have that done, you're ready to start hand stitching. Some people will do their binding on a machine, but I happen to really love to hand stitch, and I find it quite meditative and relaxing. And here's where your clips are really great. They'll hold it, and as soon as you get up to the next one, and you want to pick up that bottom layer and up through the very corner, the very edge inside that binding, right over there. So just be careful that you're not poking through to the front side. If you have trouble with your thread, you can always run it along some beeswax as well, so it doesn't knot up on you. And you'll want to continue that all the way around. And to give you an idea of what it will look like when it's finished, you want to give it a little press. It's just really pretty. So now you know about my secret weapon, my 6-inch saucer. You can make your own curves on your quilts. You can also go to Creative Bug and download a free class that I did on a table runner that has curved edges as well. And that might go into a little bit more depth. So just look under Michele Muska table runner, and that might be of a help too. They have a lot of free classes that you can participate in as well. And then also when we're talking about the straight edge and joining the binding together, I always have a little bit of a hard time with that. And I'd like to suggest going to Jenny Doan from Missouri Star Quilt. She has a great tutorial on how to join them together. So that's what I did right here, and I was very successful and happy with that. So I hope you enjoyed learning about curves. I think it's an easy way to finish off your quilt. Because some of us just have a little bit hard time with those mitered corners. So thanks again.